The crowd held its breath as the wild stallion, Blaze, stamped his hooves in defiance, his eyes blazing with untamed fury. In the center of the arena, a 17-year-old boy in a wheelchair rolled forward, the weight of his past pressing down on him. No one believed he could tame the beast that had broken every trainer before him. But as the silence deepened, something unexpected happened. A bond was formed, not through force, but through understanding. Could a broken boy and a wild horse defy the odds and heal each other? Or would the wild stallion remain untamable? The answer would come in the most surprising way. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. At the Silver Ridge Equestrian Showcase, the air was thick with excitement. The grandstands were filled with spectators from all walks of life, their faces bright with anticipation. Everyone had gathered for one reason: to witness the wild stallion Blaze in action. The massive black horse stood at the center of the arena, his muscles rippling under his midnight coat, snorting fiercely as he stomped the ground. His eyes burned with an untamable spirit, a force of nature that had captivated everyone who had seen him. Blaze was no ordinary horse. He had been born wild in the vast Nevada plains and carried that untamed spirit with him wherever he went. For days, trainers had tried everything to break him, to bring him under control. Ropes, whips, even tranquilizers had been used, but nothing worked. Blaze remained as wild as ever, refusing to be tamed. He kicked and bucked, showing no sign of submission to anyone or anything. The crowd watched with bated breath, their eyes fixed on the spectacle unfolding before them. The announcer's voice rang out, adding to the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his tone amused, "this one's got a heart of steel. They say he doesn't bow to anyone. Let's see if that's true." The audience responded with a mix of laughs and gasps. Everyone knew Blaze was impossible to control, but that made him all the more thrilling to watch. It was at that moment, just as the crowd was caught up in the excitement, that something unexpected happened. From the corner of the arena, a teenage boy in a wheelchair rolled slowly into view. His name was Luke Harrison. At 17, he was a young man who had once been a champion rider, a shining star in the world of equestrian sports, but that was before the accident. 2 years earlier, a brutal ATV crash had left Luke paralyzed, and everything he once knew, his love for riding, his confidence, his sense of freedom, was stripped away in an instant. As Luke wheeled closer to the arena, the murmurs started. Whispers of disbelief spread quickly through the crowd. "What's this kid going to do?" one person muttered. "He can't even walk. There's no way he's getting anywhere near that horse." Some chuckled, others scoffed, unsure of what to expect. What they saw before them was a young man, broken in body and spirit, rolling toward a creature that had defied every trainer, every attempt to control him. It didn't make sense. Luke didn't seem to notice the doubts or the mocking glances. His face was focused, determined, and calm. Beside him, his mother Elise walked quietly, her expression a mix of hope and concern. She had brought him to this event not for entertainment, but because she thought it might spark something within him, something to pull him from the dark place he had retreated to since the accident. She had hoped that seeing horses again, feeling the energy of the competition, would remind Luke of the boy he once was, the boy who was fearless, full of life. But Luke wasn't interested in much anymore. He had lost his spark. The world he had known before the accident felt like a distant memory. But as he rolled closer to the ring, something changed. He paused just outside the arena, his grip tight on the armrests of his wheelchair. His knuckles were white from the force of his hold, but there was no hesitation in his eyes as he stared at Blaze. The wild stallion, who had been impossible to control, locked eyes with Luke. The tension in the air shifted. The crowd, once filled with skepticism and disbelief, grew quiet. Something was happening, something no one had expected. The announcer, sensing the odd energy between the boy and the stallion, added with a touch of humor, "Well, folks, looks like we've got a real surprise here. It seems like the kid wants a shot at Blaze. What do you think?" A few chuckles rippled through the stands, but Luke didn't move. He didn't flinch or react to the crowd's amusement. Instead, he simply watched Blaze, his gaze steady and unwavering. Then, in a voice that carried across the arena, Luke spoke softly. "I know what it's like to lose control," he said. The words seemed strange, as if they weren't meant for the horse, but they held weight. They weren't about commanding the stallion, forcing him into submission. They were about understanding the wildness, the chaos that Blaze had lived through, just as Luke understood his own struggle to regain control over his life after the accident. It was a quiet connection, a recognition of something deeper. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Blaze suddenly turned his head sharply toward Luke. He snorted loudly, stomping his hooves in the dirt. The ground trembled beneath him as his fierce energy filled the air. But Luke didn't react. He didn't flinch, didn't move an inch. He simply held the stallion's gaze, calm and steady. The crowd, at first unsure of what to make of this odd moment, grew more and more captivated by the unexpected exchange. For what felt like an eternity, nothing moved. Blaze circled around Luke, his movements jerky and unpredictable. Yet Luke remained calm. His face was a picture of quiet resolve, his eyes never leaving the stallion. And then, just when it seemed like the moment might stretch on forever, something incredible happened. Blaze stopped. Slowly, almost reverently, he lowered his head, inch by inch, until he was kneeling before Luke. The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd, who had been eagerly watching every move, was now completely still. Disbelief had given way to awe. Luke, the boy in the wheelchair, had somehow done what no one else had been able to do. He had made Blaze, the untamable stallion, bow in front of him. The applause erupted, but it felt distant, almost muted, as if the crowd had just witnessed something much more profound than anyone had anticipated. The spectators were in awe of the connection that had just been made, not between a man and a horse, but between two broken spirits finding their way to each other. In that moment, Luke wasn't just a boy in a wheelchair. He was someone who had found the strength to connect with the wild, untamed world in front of him. In the days that followed the Silver Ridge Equestrian Showcase, Luke Harrison found himself in an unfamiliar place, quietly sitting in the back of his mother's car, staring out the window at the passing scenery. The noise of the crowd, the applause, and the overwhelming emotions from the arena felt like a distant memory. But in his heart, something had shifted. A spark, long hidden, had been reignited. When Luke had first made his appearance in front of Blaze, the wild stallion, he hadn't known what to expect. The crowd had doubted him, and so had he. But something had happened between him and Blaze, a moment of silent understanding that had defied all logic. Blaze had knelt before him, not out of submission, but out of something deeper. Trust. That bond, however fleeting, had left Luke with more questions than answers. In the days following the event, Luke couldn't stop thinking about the wild stallion. He would replay the moment in his mind over and over again. Blaze, the fierce and untamable horse, lowering his head in quiet respect. It felt like a dream, a moment of magic that he wasn't sure he could replicate. The connection was real, but could it be more than just a fluke? Luke wasn't sure. His mother, Elise, had been hopeful. She saw the change in Luke, even if he hadn't yet recognized it himself. She could see that despite his doubts, he had started to look at the world differently. The boy who had been withdrawn and broken after his accident now seemed open. She encouraged him to keep coming back to the arena, to visit Blaze, to see where this strange connection might lead. At first, Luke resisted. The idea of working with Blaze again felt too overwhelming, too uncertain. He was still haunted by his accident, still trying to come to terms with everything he had lost. His confidence was shattered, and the idea of trying to form another bond with such a powerful, wild creature seemed impossible. But his mother wouldn't let him give up. "Just go," she said gently one afternoon as she packed him into the car again. "You don't have to do anything. Just be there. See where it takes you." It was a simple request, but something in her voice made Luke decide to go. He wheeled himself toward the arena that day, his heart heavy with questions. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that he needed to try. When Luke arrived, he saw Blaze in the distance, grazing calmly near the edge of the corral. The stallion, who had once been a whirlwind of energy and defiance, now seemed at peace. There was no wild snorting, no pounding hooves, just the quiet stillness of a horse who had found a moment of calm. But Luke wasn't fooled. Blaze was still a force to be reckoned with, and Luke knew better than anyone that taming a wild spirit wasn't something that could happen overnight. As Luke wheeled closer to the corral, he hesitated. His hand rested on the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles turning white from the tension. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. What did Blaze need from him? What did he need from Blaze? The questions were endless, and yet there was no clear answer. The trainer from the showcase, Adam, approached Luke from behind. He had seen the bond that had formed between Luke and Blaze, but he knew that there was still so much work to be done. Adam had spent years working with horses, and he understood the delicate balance between trust and control. He also understood that Luke's journey with Blaze was far from over. "You did something special with him," Adam said, his voice low and steady. "But it's just the beginning. You've got to keep going." Luke didn't respond right away. His mind was too clouded with doubts. "I don't know if I can," he murmured. "What if it was just a fluke? What if Blaze doesn't trust me again?" Adam looked at him for a long moment. "Trust isn't something that comes all at once," he said. "It's earned slowly, one step at a time. You can't force it. All you can do is show up, be patient, and let Blaze come to you." Luke nodded, but the weight of Adam's words hung heavy on him. Patience. It wasn't a word that came easy to him. Ever since the accident, patience had been in short supply. Every day felt like a struggle, every moment a reminder of what he had lost. But this was different. With Blaze, he could feel something. Not just a connection, but an understanding. He couldn't explain it, but it was there, just beneath the surface. So, Luke sat by the corral, his eyes never leaving Blaze. He didn't try to approach the stallion or call out to him. Instead, he just waited. His hands were steady on the wheels of his chair, his body still. Blaze, at first, kept his distance, circling the edge of the corral, as if unsure of Luke's intentions. But Luke didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just sat there, quiet and patient as time stretched on, and then slowly it started to happen. Blaze's movement slowed. The horse stopped pacing, his head dipping toward the ground. He stood still for a moment, just watching Luke. It wasn't much, but it was something. A small shift in the stallion's behavior that told Luke one thing. Blaze was starting to trust him again. Not completely. Not yet, but it was a start. Over the next few days, Luke continued his visits. Each time he grew more patient, more comfortable with the silence between him and Blaze. He didn't try to force the horse to do anything. Instead, he let Blaze set the pace, letting the connection grow at its own speed. Some days, Blaze was still restless, still full of the wild energy that made him so untamable. But other days, he would come closer to Luke, just a few steps at a time, his body language softening. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Luke felt discouraged when the doubts crept in, telling him that he wasn't enough, that the connection was just a fleeting moment that couldn't last. But Luke kept coming back. He kept showing up, trusting that patience and understanding would lead him somewhere new, somewhere better. And then one day when Luke was sitting at the edge of the corral, something incredible happened. Blaze stepped closer, not out of fear or hesitation, but out of curiosity. His massive body loomed near, his eyes calm as they met Luke's gaze. Luke didn't move. He simply stared back, his heart racing in his chest, and then, without warning, Blaze lowered his head again, just as he had done before. This time, Luke didn't feel surprised. He felt something else. Peace. The silent challenge had turned into a silent victory. It wasn't about controlling Blaze. It was about understanding him. And in that moment, Luke understood. The wild stallion had finally trusted him. And for the first time in a long time, Luke realized that he had trusted himself too. Over the next few days, Luke Harrison found himself returning to the Silver Ridge Arena, though this time there was no rush, no sense of urgency. His visits had become a part of his routine, a quiet part of his healing process. He no longer felt like an outsider in his own life, trapped in his wheelchair, separated from the world around him. There was something different now, something that had changed since the day he and Blaze had shared that powerful moment in the arena. Luke still couldn't explain what had happened between him and the wild stallion. It wasn't like any other connection he had ever experienced before. It was deeper, quieter, almost as if something unspoken had passed between them. For the first time since his accident, he felt like he was part of something again. He wasn't just a broken kid sitting in a wheelchair. He was someone with purpose. He didn't understand the power of that moment right away. At first, the applause had been deafening, but it didn't last. The crowd had dispersed, and Luke had been left with the silence. The silence felt comforting and heavy all at once. But as the days went on, something inside him began to shift. He realized that what he had done with Blaze wasn't just about taming a wild horse. It was about understanding, about patience. It was about recognizing the struggle both he and Blaze had gone through. It had been years since Luke had felt any real sense of control over his life. Since the accident, he had retreated into himself, refusing to face the pain, the fear, the loss. But now, in the presence of Blaze, he found a new strength. It wasn't physical strength, not the kind that came from running or riding. It was a strength of heart, of spirit, a quiet kind of strength that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. One afternoon, Luke sat on the edge of the corral, his hands resting lightly on his wheelchair's armrests. He wasn't expecting anything. He wasn't asking for Blaze to come closer. He simply waited like he had done before. The horse, who had once been full of chaotic energy, was now calm, grazing in the far corner of the corral. Luke watched him with a calm curiosity. Something in his chest stirred as he observed Blaze's powerful muscles moving in rhythm with the quiet afternoon. He didn't know what he was waiting for. Maybe for Blaze to come to him. Maybe for himself to feel something new, something stronger than before. But whatever it was, Luke wasn't sure if he was ready for it. He had already given so much of himself to this journey, but each time he approached Blaze, it felt like another step into the unknown. The fear of failure still lingered in the back of his mind. What if the bond was just a one-time thing? What if it couldn't be replicated? But as Luke sat there letting the wind wash over him, a thought occurred to him. Perhaps it didn't need to be replicated. Perhaps it was enough to simply trust in the moment, to be present with Blaze and to let whatever happened next unfold on its own. It was a quiet realization, but one that helped him push the doubts aside. Just then, Blaze lifted his head and turned toward him. Luke's heart skipped a beat. The horse's movements were slow, deliberate. There was no frantic pacing, no snorting or stomping. Blaze was calm. With each step, the distance between them grew smaller. Luke remained still, his gaze never leaving the horse. He felt a rush of something. Hope, maybe, or maybe just the realization that the connection between them was real, not because it was perfect, but because it had been earned. Slowly, steadily, patiently, Blaze stopped just a few feet away from Luke, his head lowered, his body still. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air was thick with anticipation, but it wasn't the kind of tension Luke had once felt before the accident. This was different. It was a quiet understanding between two beings who had both been broken, both searching for something they couldn't quite name. Luke reached out slowly, his hand hovering in the air for a moment before he placed it gently on Blaze's neck. He could feel the warmth of the horse's body beneath his fingers, the steady rhythm of his breathing. There was no fear in the touch, no hesitation, just a shared silence, a shared understanding. For the first time, Luke didn't feel like he was trying to control Blaze. He didn't need to. He was simply there with him in that moment, and that was enough. Over the next few days, Luke spent more and more time with Blaze. He didn't rush. He didn't force anything to happen. He let the bond between them grow, little by little, with every quiet moment. Sometimes Blaze would step closer, and sometimes he wouldn't. Sometimes he would graze quietly in the corner of the corral, ignoring Luke completely. But Luke didn't mind. He was learning that real connection wasn't about forcing things to happen. It was about being present and allowing trust to build over time. One afternoon, as Luke sat quietly by the corral, Adam, the trainer, approached him again. Adam had been watching the quiet progress between Luke and Blaze, and there was something in his eyes that showed a new understanding of the situation. "You're doing well," Adam said, his voice filled with admiration. "You're not rushing things. That's the key. Blaze can feel that." Luke nodded, though he didn't respond. Immediately, he wasn't sure what to say. He had never felt more connected to a horse than he did to Blaze, and yet he still wasn't sure if he was enough for Blaze. Was he truly worthy of the trust the stallion had shown him? It was a question that lingered in the back of his mind, but Luke had learned something important over the past few days. It didn't matter, because in the end it wasn't about being worthy. It was about being patient, about showing up, and about understanding. As Luke continued his visits, the bond between him and Blaze deepened. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when doubt crept in, but Luke had learned not to focus on those. Instead, he focused on the present, on the connection he had with the horse, and on the quiet healing that had taken place between them. With each passing day, Luke found that he was healing too, not just because of his connection with Blaze, but because of the trust he had started to build in himself. The boy who had once been lost, isolated in his wheelchair, now felt like he was becoming whole again. It wasn't about the applause, the recognition, or the performance. It was about the quiet healing bond between him and Blaze and the strength they had found in each other. The day of the final test arrived, and Luke Harrison felt the weight of it more than he had ever expected. It wasn't just any other competition at Silver Ridge, it was different. This time the stakes were higher. Luke wasn't just going to witness Blaze, the wild stallion, from the sidelines. No, today he was stepping into the arena with him. Again, but this time with the world watching. The invitation had come unexpectedly. After the breathtaking display of trust between him and Blaze during the previous showcase, word had spread. Luke and Blaze had become a sensation, not just in the equestrian community, but beyond. People were fascinated by their connection, their bond that had been built on understanding rather than control. And so Luke had been invited to participate in a special event, the Companion Freestyle Competition. It was a category designed for therapy riders, but it had never seen someone like Luke. He didn't ride with reins, saddles, or traditional equipment. He didn't need them. But Luke didn't see this as a chance to prove anything. He wasn't interested in the applause or the attention that had come with it. He wasn't even sure he could handle it. The pressure weighed on him as he wheeled himself toward the arena, his heart racing in his chest. His palms were sweaty on the armrests of his wheelchair, and for the first time in a while he felt that familiar sense of fear creeping back. The doubt that had haunted him since his accident, the fear that he wasn't enough, that he wasn't ready, seemed louder than ever. But then, as he took a deep breath, something changed. A quiet voice inside him reminded him of what had brought him here, the journey he had taken with Blaze, the trust they had built, and the peace they had found together. This wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about impressing anyone, or proving that he could tame a wild stallion. It was about something much deeper. It was about the journey they had shared, the healing they had both found. That was what mattered. The crowd in the stands was packed, buzzing with excitement, but Luke didn't notice them. He couldn't. His focus was entirely on Blaze, who was being led into the other side of the arena. The horse's dark coat gleamed in the sunlight, and his powerful muscles rippled as he paced nervously in his pen. He was the same Blaze who had defied every attempt to break him, the same stallion who had once seemed impossible to control, and now, Luke was going to walk beside him in front of hundreds of people. As Blaze entered the ring, the tension in the air thickened. People held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. This wasn't just a regular performance. This was a test of everything Luke and Blaze had built together. There were no ropes, no whips, no reins to control the horse. There was just Luke in his wheelchair, and Blaze standing tall and proud, still as wild as ever. Luke wheeled himself to the center of the arena, his body tense, but his mind focused. He didn't need to say anything to the horse. He just needed to be present, to trust that the bond they had formed would guide them through this moment. For the first time in a long time, Luke didn't feel like the accident had taken everything from him. It had taken his ability to walk, his ability to ride, but it hadn't taken his ability to connect, to understand. And in that moment, Luke knew that connection was everything. The announcer's voice echoed over the loudspeakers, calling out Luke's name, but he barely heard it. His eyes were locked on Blaze, his heart beating in time with the rhythm of the horse's movements. The crowd was watching, but Luke was focused only on Blaze, on the silent understanding they had shared. Blaze moved into the center of the ring, his eyes still wary but not as full of the wild energy he had once displayed. He was calmer, more controlled. Luke could see it in the way Blaze moved, the way his muscles shifted beneath his skin, the way his breathing slowed. For the first time, the stallion wasn't fighting. He was listening. Luke didn't speak at first. He simply wheeled a few inches, closer to Blaze, his gaze steady, calm. The horse snorted and pawed at the ground as if reminding Luke of his power, his independence, but Luke didn't flinch. He didn't back down. He stayed still, his eyes never leaving Blaze's. "I'm not going to force you," Luke said softly, his voice carrying across the ring. "I'm not here to control you. I know what it's like to be scared. I know what it's like to feel trapped. But I'm not here to hurt you." The crowd fell into a hushed silence. They were waiting for something to happen, waiting for Blaze to respond. But Luke wasn't asking the stallion for anything. He wasn't demanding anything. He was simply speaking to him, letting him know that he understood. For a long moment, nothing happened. Blaze stood still, watching Luke. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy, but Luke remained calm. Then, slowly, the horse took a step forward. Another. And then, without warning, Blaze lowered his head, just as he had done before. The crowd gasped. A few people began to clap, but the applause was hesitant, unsure, as if they were witnessing something far more profound than just a horse kneeling before a boy. Luke didn't smile. He didn't need to. He wasn't here for recognition. He was here for himself, for Blaze, and for the quiet bond they had built together. The moment seemed to last forever, but when it finally ended, Luke found himself overwhelmed with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. The wild stallion, the one who had once seemed impossible to control, had trusted him again. And in doing so, he had given Luke something far more valuable than any applause. He had given him the courage to trust himself again. As Luke wheeled himself toward the edge of the arena, his heart full of emotion, he realized that the final test wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about showing the world that he could control Blaze. It was about showing himself that, even in his brokenness, he was capable of healing. And with Blaze by his side, Luke knew that he could face anything.